Hi, good afternoon. My name is Naomi, and I'm a student fellow on the board of the India Initiative. And today I'll be introducing our next panel, Skill India. When Prime Minister Modi launched Skill India in July 2015, its stated goal was to train 400 million Indians in a variety of workplace skills by 2022. One of the primary motivations behind this campaign was India's demographic youth bulge. Projections state that the current job marketplace does not have the capacity to absorb these new workers into the labor force, and the Prime Minister hopes to create the additional economic activity through this initiative. Panelists Raj Gilda, co-founder of Lendahan India, and Adrienne Martin, CEO of Sanam S4, are working on the front lines of training India's youth for future careers. They will discuss innovative approaches to leadership training and address the successes and failures of Skill India and its potential impact on the country's growing economy. This discussion will be moderated by Nandini Mulaji, a former Georgetown student and a current business analyst at McKinsey. And so a little bit about our panelists today. Raj Gilda, who's the co-founder of Lendahan India. Raj is a banker turned social entrepreneur and co-founder of Lendahan India. He leads the team for resource mobilization and external relations for Lendahan India, apart from managing its presence in the US and the UK. He has worked across Asia, Europe, and North America, and brings 20 years of varied experience in the fields of education, banking, and insurance. Adrienne Martin, who is the CEO of Sanam S4, his international experience began with launching his first business in India in 1993, and he has worked in India ever since, including living there for 11 years. Through leading the international expansion for a fast-growing tech company in the late 1990s and early 2000s, Adrienne also has developed a first-hand understanding of doing business in China, South Africa, Taiwan, Singapore, and the UAE. Adrienne has been active in establishing international sales and support offices, as well as implementing local development and manufacturing facilities. And with that, please join me in welcoming our panelists today.
Well, thanks so much for being here today. I'm really excited to get started on discussing a very, very key issue. How do we get the youth in India to be skilled and then successfully and gainfully employed? To that end, sort of want to start with a larger perspective rather than sort of jumping into Skill India. Maybe both of you could just add a little color to what is, having worked in India, worked in the Indian sort of labor industry and sector for a while, what is your long-term perspective? Where have you seen the biggest changes over the last 10 to 15 years? And sort of what gets you really excited about the future? And what makes you most apprehensive?
Well, I'll pick up on that. Thanks very much, Nandini, and thank you, Irfan, for hosting us today. In the last 26 years, India's growth story has been one that we've all witnessed with great enthusiasm and anxiety in equal measures, I think, during that period. And that remains the case. You'll have heard a range of balanced views today which talk about India's unparalleled opportunity to rise to the top table economically. And I think there is an underlying expectation, belief that it will take its place at the table. But that will not come without major obstacles being bypassed along the way. I think one of those obstacles, and we've heard it in some of the panels today, is the divergence between the elite, the growing middle classes and the acceleration of the middle classes, and those that are getting left behind at the base of the pyramid. And I think, whilst there is tremendous optimism, India's long-term success story will only be sustainable providing that the bottom of the pyramid is taken along with it. And I think in addressing that challenge, the skills agenda is absolutely number one priority.
Absolutely. So
I would say that there is no other place I would like to be than India at this point. In terms of what's going on there, there are obstacles, there are challenges, absolutely no doubt. But then which country doesn't, right? And I've lived in US for 11 years, and one of the CEO of a foundation who is funding us was visiting India, and he asked me that, do you miss New York. I used to live in New York. So I said, of course I miss New York, because you live in any city for 11 years, you'll miss it and live along New York in that, sense. But I do miss New York, but then this is the time of the country when we are writing the playbook of the country, like what is going on and which other place will allow you to sort of, do that. So that's the story of India, right? To me, that the opportunity is unparalleled. There is absolutely no doubt about it. The obstacles which remains in this case is that it's almost like country in a hurry, right? That for a country so diverse, so large, so so different, the solutions are not going to appear overnight. So if one was thinking that Mr. Modi can announce Make in India, Skill India campaign, and tomorrow the entire India will be skilled, that would be a biggest myth in life, right? I mean, it's a pretty long-term solution which needs to happen, which will not be bound by election promises and electoral votes and other things too, because the challenges we are facing are a lot of structural challenges in that process. So that is one, I think the one challenge which we are facing in it, that many of the policies are driven by politics rather than the reality. What it should be needed there in the first place. Second challenge which we'll be facing is the difference between inspiration versus reality. That I may want to become an aeronautic engineer, but if I don't even have a primary school in my village, then what am I going to do, right? So bridging the gap between that, like what Adrienne mentioned earlier, like what I'm inspiring for versus what is available to me, and how do I marry the two. And I think the third thing being the whole issue of dignity of labor, because there can be job, skill gap of 300 million, 400 million, whatever, it's never going to get filled if the dignity of labor remains an issue going forward, because there might be demand for thousands of drivers, thousands of plumbers, thousands of carpenters, thousands of welders, but if one doesn't want to become one, then it's not going to address the challenge in the first place, right? So what we need to look at is how do we address this challenge in long term rather than worrying about that, how do I create jobs, tomorrow, right?
Absolutely. So I want to pick up on that theme of a country in a hurry, and maybe a prime minister in a hurry as well. Skill India sounded like a really great idea, a very ambitious goal when it started, 400 million by 2022, where in 2018, we've created so far 3.5 million jobs, where about, in my math is pretty bad, but I'm going to say 398 million short on that. Do we think we're going to be able to create those in 4 years? Or has our Prime Minister chosen to sort of overpromise and in some ways undercut the actual long-term, the amount of work that needs to go into skilling the country? Are we being too ambitious? Is Modi being too quick? Is there a better mood? Do you think Skill India has been a success?
So I think depends on whom you ask, right? So on one hand, I would say that, and I know Reagan famously said, I want one-handed economist and not, two-handed economist, because they keep on going from one hand to another hand. So on one hand, I think the emergence of national skills qualification framework, which came into India in 2011-12, and that is what is being prevalent in the skill industry currently. The way it is getting established, the way it is coming into force, that is phenomenal, and given the country of the size of India and diversity of India, to make anything work is a challenge, So to be fair to the policymaker, to be fair to Mr. Modi, and other things too, it has come a long way in the given 3, 4, 5 year time period, that we have had. But in terms of can those 400 million jobs can be created? Absolutely not. In fact, I've been telling that, with this whole skill development industry, there are more jobs which have been created within the industry than by the industry. Unfortunately, that is the reality currently. You throw a stone in any Indian street, and that 5 out of 10 times it can fall on a vocational training provider. But not somebody who has got a job by that training which has been provided by the vocational training provider at the same time. So.
Absolutely. I think that leads us to a sort of interesting numbers game there, where in the financial year of 2018, where India set to create 600,000 new jobs, right? Under, I think, Skill India, one of their latest announcements was that they had skilled 35 million women. So we have 35 million women who are now skilled. We only have 600,000 jobs. Are we just skilling people but not providing them employment? How do we actually make the numbers match?
I think part of the challenge is skilling people in the right way. If you look at the Make in India campaign, it was designed to attract big industry from the US, big industry from Germany, big industry from the UK, Japan, and elsewhere. And a lot of the complaints that were made from companies that were looking to come into India were that they couldn't get the right workforce to do the jobs that they needed to do. And they didn't feel it was their responsibility to train the workforce, and it was going to take them too long to train those workforce in the first place. And a whole number of other issues, land and labour reform, which of course are major barriers to large corporations manufacturing in India. But there's a bit of a chicken and egg at the moment, which is where the Indian government clearly wants to see big industry setting up, big job creators going there, but they're not, because they don't feel that the right skills are there in the first place. And I think what we have to do is to take a step back and say, well, what skills are we looking for? What do the companies actually need, and how do we develop those skills in a way that is relevant to the businesses that are seeking to invest? Because many of the people that have been here today will tell you a list of 10, 15, 20 corporations who would love to do more in India. There are some political reasons around the America First campaign which are kind of holding them back potentially here, but they would love to do more. But if they don't feel that they can get the right workforce, why buy into a vision that doesn't give them the software to essentially build out what they're trying to do? So I think that's one thing. I think the second thing is looking at where the world's economy is going and where jobs are going to come from. One of the big problems I think India's had in the last 5 to 10 years, and you can run the numbers, and in any way you look at them, they haven't done a good job in achieving those targets. They've just been too ambitious, but they were the targets that needed to be set because they're real people needing real jobs. Part of the challenge is you've got a global economy which is changing very, very, very quickly. I was in Delhi last week, and we had a company offsite where we invited Lavkesh Vig, the head of artificial intelligence from Tata, to speak to us. And apart from frightening the living daylights out of every member of my staff about the fact that we're all going to be dictated to and ordered around by robots in the next 20 years, what he clearly stated was that he has a shortfall alone in one research division of 2,000 jobs. Where he cannot get access to good quality artificial intelligence skills. Now it's not your plumbing skills, it's not your electrical skills. This is a skill that is very relevant to India's future. And he also stated that India is 6 years behind the rest of the world in artificial intelligence R&D and implementation. And 6 years may not sound like a lot, but in artificial intelligence terms, that's a lifetime. And so his point to us was, if we don't building the infrastructure for the skills that are needed tomorrow and the day after, we're lost, because the skills that we're trying to fill now are not necessarily the ones that the world needs. And he said, unfortunately, the base of the pyramid is so large that you have to engage them in a way that is meaningful to the job creation market of the future. Otherwise, you're just going to be artificially creating jobs for people that, frankly, in 10 years' time are going to be worthless anyway.
So I think in addition to what I would think that too much focus is given in this whole skill development industry on the organized sector. Actually, Tatas can get those 2,000 people, whenever they want, actually. To me, the name of the ministry is Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, whereas that E is not there almost anywhere. It is mostly the skill development, and I have been saying that also the whole National Skill Development Corporation, which is supposed to be the premier skill development agency in India, is organized around organized sector. It is not for the unorganized sector. Actually, 80% of the job or the growth in the jobs and job creations are going to come in the small and micro enterprises. At the end of the day, to me, Tatas, Mahindras, Bajaj, and they will find their worker, because if they are looking for one, they will find 10, because that's the jobs everybody is inspiring for. Whereas what not is being paid much attention to is towards the job creation by entrepreneurship, job creation by small and micro enterprises. Now, Mr. Modi came out with a scheme called Mudra Yojana, where the entrepreneurs were supposed to get 10 lakhs rupees loan without much of a collateral, because that's the chicken and egg. You don't have collateral, so you can't get a loan. You can't get a loan, you can't grow business, so you can't create a collateral. So that was supposed to break the whole barrier of this Mudra loan. But I'm yet to find anybody who has got the loan yet, that Mudra loan. Because of the bureaucracy papers and this and that and all that. And so, in fact, some of my friends who have left their job, they were looking for that loan as well, and they were not able to get the loans, right? So I think what needs to happen, if we really have to address this challenge in a very real way, is to also equally focus on the small and micro enterprises, within the India, because that is where the real jobs are. 80% of the jobs are going to be lying there. As compared to organized sector, I think they will take care of themselves. NSDC, National Skill Development Corporation, was supposed to be 49%, 51% partnership between industry and the government. 49% by the government, 51% by the industry. So far, whatever money has been spent, 98% have been government and not even 2% by industry. So I think the bigger challenge we are facing is not enough equal industry participation and the industry owning up to it. We always quote example of Australia, Germany, and other people. There, actually, the industries which are running the skill development center, not left to the government to actually determine the skill development, policy. So whether it is apprenticeship, whether it is, internships or other things too, is what needs to be sort of, looked after, rather than only the 60 days or 90 days course of Pradhan Mantri Kaushalya Vikas Yojana, in which everybody is benefiting but the trainee, in this whole process, right?
Yeah, so Adrienne, you mentioned before that foreign companies are sort of nervous and hesitant to invest in India based on our sort of skill development. But what is it going to take if we move away from the foreign companies and look at our homegrown industries and companies and ask, what is it going to take to move from that 2% contribution to moving it to closer to the 50%? Why are they nervous? And how do we make them more comfortable about investing in our own workers?
I think if you look back at parallels, so if you look at Japan's growth in the 60s and 70s and where that came from, in post-World War II, Japan was on its knees, and admittedly it gained a lot of funding from elsewhere to reconstruct, but it didn't really have industries of such. And the pioneer of the just-in-time process, Taiichi Ohno from Japan, from Toyota, came to the US, studied Ford, and he looked at Ford. He said, okay, this is the baseline. This is where the automobile industry is now. What do I do to move this agenda forward? And he created a heavy industry, the automobile industry under Toyota. That created a tremendous amount of jobs, but it also created a lot of innovation, because you do need those big corporations firing on all cylinders to trickle down. All of the micro entrepreneurs that do end up finding success in a company, they're feeding someone further up the food chain. That's just how economics tends to work. So Japan very successfully built on what was a traditional industry in the USA, took it further, and as a result of that automation and efficiency, it then created everything from new phones to computers to cameras, and of course, it then became a victim of its own success, because it became, everything became too expensive there, and China and Singapore and Taiwan started eating its lunch. And you've seen China do that as well. China's looked at what Japan did, created a certain stable benchmark, had the ability of the leverage of labor, which Japan had run out of, good low-cost labor at that time, has built on it. And China's now developing its own R&D, its own IP, and is building on that as well. And I think, India can learn a lot from those examples and say, okay, what can we take and move forward from an international benchmark? So by all means, welcome in these companies. But I think there are opportunities for the Mahindras and the Tatas and the Reliances of this world, the big Indian corporations, to really move the agenda forward, because they do have the advantage of labor, which many of the Western worlds are suffering with now. And there is still a cost problem for major economies like the US in production.
So, Raj, what would you say is the biggest hesitancy then for companies like Reliance and Tata to buy in more? Because we're still, like to me, that 2% versus the 50% number, that's a huge difference. And that's going to create a lot more jobs than this sort of like the 600,000 number that we're seeing being created in this financial year itself. Where's the hesitancy from our own Indian companies coming from?
So I don't really think there is a hesitancy from Indian company, because in any case, most of the organized sector in India is working on an outsourced basis. You go for a job with Bajaj today, you go for a job with Tata's today, you go for a job with Reliance today. The direct employment with those companies is impossible. What they are hiring is sort of an outsourced contractor, and the contractor is the one which is going and hiring other people. So I don't think there is any hesitancy per se in that sense. I think the hesitancy is more around, in any case, most of the time the training is happening on the job. So regardless of whether you're a BTech engineer or a fake engineer like me who doesn't even know how to hold a screwdriver, or you are a PhD or you are a 10th pass, most of the time the first learning is happening on the first job itself, right? So the issue is more around the employability rather than the skills per se. So for example, a soft like showing up to work on time, or being responsible for what you have been doing, acting proactive. So those things unfortunately are totally forgotten in this whole Skill India game, where it is more about the work ethics itself rather than a domain of work or some field of work that you are sort of talking about, right? So that is one thing which we need to look at. And secondly, now given that doing things with your hands or doing things with your hands is not considered to be glamorous or not considered to be status, is a huge issue, right? So I'll describe a scenario here. Say it's a home in India. Your flush is not working in your toilet, and you call a plumber. You call like 3-4 times, and finally that plumber will show up, and you will direct that plumber right away to the toilet. He will do something with his his tools within 5 minutes, and then he'll ask for 500 rupees, and you will hesitantly pay 500 rupees that, 5 minute ke kaam ke liye 500 rupiya liya, that for 5 minutes ka work, he's charging me 500 rupees. And you give him grudgingly 500 rupees and he's gone, okay? Now compare that with somebody who is coming to your home to sell a cable TV connection or a credit card, application. You will have him sit on the sofa, offer him, water, offer him, chai and everything. And even though that person is going to put you in debt for lifetime and not solving any of your life issues at all, right? Whereas the first person has really solved your life issues, that your life will be miserable without a functioning toilet, right? So that's remained the huge challenge which you're facing in India, right? That how do we address this? And unless we take steps right now to address, things like those, 10 years down the line, we can have the same panel discussion, and in that sense, because unless we address issues like this, it's not going to take care of the structural issues that we have, right? And that way, if you look at it, Uber and Ola is the competitor of Uber, giving run for its money, have done more to restore dignity of labor in India than probably 100 organizations like mine who have done in all these years, right? So what they did, they just ensured a fair pay, they just ensured a very fair treatment. So the status which is given to a driver, is so that itself has changed the scene. And to me, more steps like that are needed in order to solve the long-term issues that we have. Right?
So let's talk more about that. I think dignity of labor is a topic that comes up a lot when we think about the workforce in India. You have plumbing on one end, you have low-tech, high-labor manufacturing. These aren't sexy jobs. How do we make them? How do we make it so that people are excited and interested in going into these areas and we're just not worrying and catering to the service sector? Because like you said, again, Ola, Uber, those are still service sector jobs. We're moving away from the sort of manufacturing and that sector jobs. How do we get people to look at manufacturing, whether it's sort of apparel and garment, which is we're pretty good at that, or actually thinking about like high-tech manufacturing? Why are we not investing more in that and continuing to focus on the service sector?
So if I may pick up on this. So I lived in India for the second time from 2008 to 2015, and in applying for a US visa, I got out of the country for a couple of years and spent some time in Switzerland. And my children were educated in Switzerland at the time, and my two daughters were 7 and 5 at the time. And even at 7 years old, my daughter was not being taught to write or count or read, because that's the Swiss system. She can build Lego better than any American kid you've ever seen. She can do Meccano, she can build stuff out of straws. Her sister has got all sorts of hand skills that she can do. Arts and craft, they're off the charts. We moved to the USA, we put them in a school here in Arlington, and we arrived at the last 2 weeks of term. And the headmistress got us at the last day, and she said, "I'm really sorry, but I'm holding your daughter down because she's just, she's got developmental problems." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, she can't read or write or anything." And I said, "Well, that's because she's never been taught to read or write." She said, "Well, we're going to hold her down." I said, "No, what you have to understand is whether she can learn or not, because my daughter can ski mountains quicker than anyone else, because I taught her and she learned. She can build Meccano because she was taught and she learned." I said, "So give her the opportunity to learn and see if she's ready for first grade." So she had a 4-week intensive program, and by the end of it, the headmistress called me and she said, "I'm very sorry, Mr. Martin, and this is the first time I say this in my 40-year career. I was wrong. Your daughter is exceptionally bright," and takes it from her mother, clearly, not me. And she's passed with flying colours. And I learnt a big lesson there, very late in my career. And in Switzerland, in Scandinavia, in Germany, there's not this race to become scientists or economists in your first 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years of your life. In India, and increasingly so here in the US, there's tremendous pressure on being a genius by 5, right? And if the children aren't exposed to using their hands, doing stuff during their school day other than reading and math and computer science and so on, they're never going to be interested. Your brain is, by the time you've got to 9, your brain has really stopped growing and it's stopped developing. If you haven't had exposure to an alternative form of education, it's the same with languages, it's very, very difficult to pick them up. So my answer to your question is, I think India needs to look at primary education, which we know is a big challenge in India, and embed more of a skills development angle or alternative skills other than the harsh expectation that if you're not a genius by the age of 6, you're a failure, which is what many kids in Indian schools are deemed at that age already.
I'm going to push back a little on that and say you did list out countries that are incredibly socioeconomically well off. There is a social safety net and a security net there, and it is easier to trip, fall, and fail if you know that, you're in Scandinavia, you're not 1 out of 1.2 or 1.3 billion people. The race to the top is the race to the top because we don't have a social security net for Indian students. So while I'm the first one to say the Indian primary school education does need to change, I'm not sure if merely saying, we need to have alternate education in schools that currently don't even have toilets is really going to solve our larger manufacturing issue. I guess I was sort of pushing more towards, yes, it would be great to get at age 9 or 10 when I was in school and I was being told to do political science because as a girl, that's probably the smartest thing I could have done because obviously I could not have done math, but let's instead turn the conversation to how do we get people who might have gone through the education system, who are maybe 15, 20, 25, how do we get them to go from the service sector to the manufacturing sector, from unemployed to employed? Because long-term wise, we should definitely change the primary school system. That'll serve us well in the future. But what do we do right now for that youth bulge that is going to be part of the 7.1% of Indians who are currently unemployed?
So first of all, I should hire Adrienne to be my spokesperson because that's what exactly we do. As I run an NGO, this Slenda in India, so we provide vocational education as part of school curriculum. We are not working with primary school, but the thought is exactly same. We work with the kids from 9th to 12th grade, which is 14 to 18 years old, introducing vocational education as part of the curriculum. So it's 100 marks subject now out of 600 in India. So one of the ways to look at how do we address this issue is going to be whether it is internship, whether it is apprenticeship, because whatever you create, the center-based models are not going to work, because the access, because the numbers are so huge that putting special skill development center and then somebody going to there for 90 days program and all is not going to solve the large issue that we have. Whereas to integrate vocational education within your mainstream education and making it the status which it's supposed to give is what we will do. And to answer your question about dignity of labor, it starts at the school level, right, in that sense. Because by the time you're 18, 20, 25, your beliefs are formed. And to influence that is going to be much more difficult. So the kids and this is there is a scheme called centrally sponsored scheme of vocationalization of secondary and higher secondary schools in India now. And that's what we are at the forefront of implementing for the central government of India now, where 100 out of 600 marks are given to vocational. And by doing this itself, the status is given, right? In that sense, that yes, vocational is important. Otherwise, vocational used to be something called SUPW, which was supposed to be socially useful, productive work, but then realistically called some useful period wasted. In that sense. But by giving it 100 marks subject and it appearing competitive to score and other things too, is the beginning of it, right? Where it is treated at par with math, science, social science and other languages, in that, right? That is one. Secondly, the internship part. Now, unfortunately, in India, because we don't have much of unlike Western countries, a part-time work culture and other things too, you might become a graduate, but may not have worked for a single day in your life yet, So that is a huge impediment towards, because you haven't had a real life, practical experience at all. So bringing that internship or bringing the apprenticeship as part of your school curriculum or as part of your graduation is another solution. Because at the end of the day, everybody says that this education is useless, it is not doing anything. You open any job advertisement, to your point, the first qualification, you should be a BCom, you should be MCom, you should have a graduate degree, you should have a postgraduate degree. So my question always has been that if this education is so useless, then why that is being put as a very first filtering criteria when you are looking for, when somebody is looking for a job, right, in that sense. So, and thinking about this, our organization came out with this policy 3 years back. We started hiring people, and our job advertisement says we don't want to know what you have studied, we don't want to know where you are working, we don't want to know how many years you have worked for. Just answer a few questions, which is about risk-taking, answer a few questions about how many times have you failed, what have you done differently in your life? Have you made money before you turned 18? Or have you run away from your home, when you were fed up with your parents? So things like those is what one needs to look for, rather than employers going behind, the same, degrees, which supposedly are not doing the job, right?
Awesome. So just before we turn to audience questions, we can't discuss the labor force without specifically talking about women and their role in the labor force. So India is at 24% female labor force participation rate, which is almost half of the global female labor force participation rate of 40%. If we manage to actually meet that, the Indian economy grows by, best case scenario, 2.9 trillion by 2025. Even worst case scenario, if it still grows by 1 trillion. What are we doing to make sure that we have women who are joining the workforce and are staying in the workforce?
Well, I'll pick up on that. So we employ 175 people in India across our offices, and 60% of those are female, and the average age of those employees is 30. So we have women either side of 30 as the bulk of our workforce. Now, to most employers, that is the worst place to hire women, because they're at maternity age. Now with the new maternity benefit scheme, you're losing them for 6 months. This year we have a big new cost in terms of providing creche facilities. So we are absolutely gung-ho about our gender balance being weighed towards females because they add a huge amount of value to our team, very productive, and we won't change that going forward. I do think that there's a much bigger societal challenge that we're all dealing with, and we've heard it discussed a number of times today about women's place in the workforce, and that's changing through some of the leadership that you're seeing at corporate level, I think, and I just caught it this morning in the Business Standard in India that Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw has become the number one most respected business person in India, so which is she's a female leader, and that's a fantastic endorsement for female leadership in the country. And I think it's got to be led from the front. I think it's very difficult for the underbelly of society to push women forward because that's really where the challenge is at the moment. So as much leadership that can be done out front in encouraging people to see the benefits of employing women and creating an environment that is open to them and is generally equitable. I mean, a lot of people talk about gender balance in India, but the environments that they're working are just not the same. My second job in India in 1994 was working for the Indian government running a Mahila Mandal, a women's empowerment group in a slum in Delhi. And on one hand, I had this female class that I was working with on gender and on entrepreneurship, and they were producing great things that they were selling out into the market. But they were kind of stuffed in a room in the back of this juggy with no lights and no air conditioning or anything. Yet the men's entrepreneurship group were kind of out in the more salubrious area of the slum, if you can call it that. And they had much more facilities and resources and a laptop at the time to use to take notes and so on. So I think there's a leadership role first and foremost that needs to continue and is of course doing a good job currently, and then enabling the people at the lower ends to kind of see what's going on further up and have the confidence. I think that confidence is definitely growing, but there's more of an impetus, I think, to support some of these initiatives for employees to take on women readily.
So, I listened to the women. What was the panel before?
Women in leadership.
Yeah. I think there's too much negativity around this whole women, employment and that issue in that, sense. I mean, we work with a lot of schools. We have, employees close to about 65% of our work. Almost 70% is women of 140 that we have. Women are actually star of all our programs. So it's just matter of time before it will come up. And to me, rather than the whole patronizing the issue, by their own merit, they are going to displace boys pretty soon, in that sense. In fact, just last week, we were talking to the Secretary of Ministry of HRD that actually I'm more worried about the boys than the girls right now. You go to any school, you go to any workforce, you go any visits, these are the girls who are always speaking up, the girls who are always, volunteering to do things, girls who are always doing, we in our vocational training program, there is no gender bias. So the girls are also learning welding, plumbing, carpentry. Boys are also learning food processing. Boys are also learning stitching and other things too. And many times we have done these experiments where 4 girls and 4 boys are given, the same job to be done by themselves, and the girls have always done it better, cheaper, and faster. In that, and as an employer, we are employing people 140, and we are interviewing probably 10 people every day. I don't have a lens of whether that person is a man or woman. At the end of the day, the job needs to get done. Because I really don't care, whether I'm not going to say that I need to increase my diversity participation, so let's hire more women, in any case. It's more about just by merit, who is able to get the job done, that person will be hired. And believe me, by whatever I have seen in India currently, pretty soon we won't have this issue, anymore in that.
That's a really, really positive note to strike. But I mean, the reality on the ground is not as positive, right? You work, you're like, a factory has 3 shifts. Indian law prevents a woman from being in a factory after 7 p.m., which means you automatically have 1 shift that is all male. So we can talk about merit-based or not trying to increase diversity hiring, but we have laws in place that prevent women from being in an actual workplace. Even in terms of like skill development in under the Skill India thing, the 35 million jobs that were created for women happen to be as dairy and poultry farmers and apparel and garments. Again, there seems to be a bias towards women being in like low-tech, high-labor industries and not doing some of the coolest stuff in manufacturing. I grew up in India. I stepped foot on a factory floor for the first time 6 months ago, and I realized I love manufacturing and I love digital manufacturing, and I didn't get those opportunities in India, partly because, unfortunately, like even today, if you are a girl, there are limited opportunities. So I think it's great to say that girls are doing amazingly well in school. I'm sure we are. I know we are. But we're still at 27% workforce participation.
Just to quote, to share the example with you, we introduced internship program between 11th and 12th grade vacation. And this was from reality, by the way. You quoted ground reality as such. So we have introduced an internship program between 11th and 12th of 3 weeks. And these are 3 girls. I'm quoting the example of 3 girls who are commerce students. Commerce is they're pursuing their BCom. And we managed to get them internship with the CNC machine operator for 3 weeks. Now they got a job offer to go back full time. They already joined there and making 10,000 rupees a month right now. Okay, and they stay there for 1.5 years. I'm sure based on their skills itself, they are going to get whatever job they want. Now in terms of let's be frank here, and I will be a little outspoken here. Restriction of some kind of jobs and other things too might be the employers, what you can say, their limitation on that as well, right? In that sense, whatever that might be. But at the same time, there are enough instances, there are enough sort of positive things happening as well. That's what my meaning was, that nowhere in these discussions, the positive aspects are being highlighted, of the women doing well. And I'm not talking about the girls doing well in school, not academically. I was talking about actually doing vocational training. Academically, we all know girls will do well. But I'm saying even in vocational training in other spaces as well, the girls are doing quite well. And it's just that we need to highlight those aspects more and more in the discussions like these so that it becomes a positive aspect of it. That's all.
Well, I think it's important to keep both perspectives in mind. That being said, yeah, we are going to open the floor for questions, and I have. Could we have a few hands just so I can get maybe? Oh, wow. Okay. You know what? Let's take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's it. Sorry. And then if you guys answer the questions really quickly, maybe we'll do another round. But the mic's yours.
My name's Dee. I'm a lawyer here in Washington, D.C. When I say the word good work ethics, what does that word mean to you? It's not dignity of labor when you give them internships and want them to work. But what does that word mean, good work ethics? It's like you can get the job, but you might be let go because the quality of your work isn't good.
I mean, look.
Could we get all 5 of the questions and then...
You're going to remember that whole thing.
Yes, I will.
So I'm Padma Shah. My question is, how do we reach children who are underprivileged and at the very margins of society for whatever reason they're exploited or not in a trajectory where they will have access to the skills that they need to succeed in life?
There's one there. The gentleman there and then. Perfect.
Hi, I am an entrepreneur, worked in India and the US. So glad that you brought dignity of labor up, but my question is related to centralization of skilling India as opposed to decentralization. It's a regulatory issue that it's probably being addressed in India now, but we are a long way away from doing that. So where do you stand on that? I mean, if you want to skill so many millions of people, do you think centralization is helpful or, go decentralized?
Hi, I'm Bhavani Parameshwar with ITC. It's hard not to pick up on the last comment you made very strategically before the question session to, get us all charged up. The proof of the pudding is in the eating, and Nandini rightly pushed back about, positive stories, etc. It's great, but positive, yes, but enough, no. The idea is to not take the foot off the gas pedal and to keep enabling this trajectory towards accepting more women in the mainstream. The numbers are abysmal, but in the right direction. But I think in this kind of a background, to highlight positivity is, we can all, this is a fairly informed crowd. It's good, but I think what we need to do is to act upon it on the ground and change realities to the 40% that we're talking about. I'm sorry, it was more a question come comment, but
Yeah. Do you want me to say the questions again, or do you have it?
No. I was just going to pick up on that last point, and then we'll come back to the others if I may. Did you say you work with ITC? So ITC is one of the biggest employers in the country. I worked by one of your factories in Saharanpur in the early 1990s, so I know your organisation well. Where do you feel the balance of responsibility lies between addressing that challenge? Is it more on the side of the government, or is it more on the side of industry, or do you honestly believe that there's an equal responsibility and both government and the private sector are going to take it forward in equal measures?
I think there is responsibility on both sides, but I think as a company, ITC is committed to increasing diversity. It's one of our core state principles. And we are actually, talking about skills, in this panel, we didn't address the concept of improving skills even in the agricultural sector. People are just coming into farms and, we put in the previous panel, I had mentioned this, that there's 52% of the workforce in agrarian sector. What are we doing to even skill them right, to give them sustainable practices and so on? We're not doing that, but I'm saying we are committed to improving diversity, growing in that direction. But when it comes to education itself, I think the way we need structural changes, and government intervention. And that may include even nutrition to be reached to people so they can absorb education. They're just basic physiological issues.
I think there's a difference there. We'll come on, maybe talk offline, but the difference between agricultural production and distribution, you raised a very good point in the last session that the supply chain is where you need the skill development, not necessarily the production. There's enough production in India currently, but it's just not getting to the market, and it's not getting to people. There's a big wastage problem. So I think there are two separate issues.
And production and productivity are different.
Yeah, let's maybe, for the interest of time, get to the other questions as well. So let's maybe talk about good work ethic and what that means to you, centralizing skill development in India, and how we can reach the bottom of the pyramid.
So I think to answer the question about good work ethic, it just means that you're being responsible for what you're supposed to do. If you're not going to show up at 8 a.m., then you call that you're not going to show up at 8 a.m. If there is some deliverable which is not going to be met because of whatever reason, then you be proactive about and tell about it. Of course, you do your best to sort of get it done. Basically, not hiding behind something, excuses and other things too, and owning up to the work and doing it. Right? To me, that's what a good work ethic is. Sort of all about putting your best foot forward. You may be successful, you may not be successful. That's a different aspect altogether. But not having done your best is not a good work ethic to me.
And I think I'll address the question on reaching the base of the pyramid, if I may. So ITC and others will be doing great work with the CSR funding that they're now distributing, and many of them, like ITC, would have been doing that for a generation prior to that ruling coming into place anyway. So I think for some of the responsible corporates, and not all large corporations in India are responsible, but for those like ITC that are, I think they're already making some headway, but it's ginormous challenge to reach them. I think one of the ideas that I often float out in discussions like this is having a greater role for Indian Railways, Indian Police, Indian Military, Indian Navy, Indian Civil Society. Those are enormous employer bases, and they are reaching out to the parts of the country that a lot of the private sectors don't. And I think there's more of a responsibility perhaps that the government can take through these employers, their own employers, to reach the base of the pyramid. So whether that's engage them more in civil society, whether that's engage them more in rural areas in supporting the military, supporting the police and so on. So I think those are some things that I would see as being positive towards reaching out to that audience, which is, frankly, diverse across a large geographic area. And then I think the final question was on
centralizing versus
centralizing. Well,
decentralized.
So in terms of centralizing, already if you look at it, earlier the central budget schemes in which there was a 75% contribution from the central government, 25% contribution from the state government was there. Already that has been reduced to 60% by central government and 40% by state government. And to compensate for that, a large pool of money has been released to the state governments, that they can decide for themselves what they want to do with that money, right? Now, of course, the idea there was that that money which is coming, more contribution which is going to the state, will be put to the right use. That's the noble intention. But of course, then there are other forces at work within the state, within the state politics and other things too, that the money which was supposed to go to some sector, whether it is education, skill development, now might go to some other sector, which might be more beneficial to that, ruling party from politics standpoint, or, some other consideration as well, right? But then, that's the pitfall of decentralization or decentralization that we are sort of, looking for, right, at the same time. And currently we are working in 15 states across India. And there's some states where the desire to do on their own is very high. So southern states, if you go to Tamil Nadu, if you go to Andhra, if you go to Telangana and all, there, I don't say, even though the word is National Skill Qualification Framework, I only say it's skill qualification framework, because as soon as they hear the word national, they think that something is going to be taken over. Their autonomy of the state is going to be going away and otherwise too. So there is a very, I think, a known sentiment, known sensitivity around it. And in the current government, they already sort of done that, sort of decentralizing the budgets there as well. Right?
Thank you. Well, I guess last one.
Sorry. My name is Vocational, and this is the Salvation Society board. We sponsored this event on behalf of Rangila as well. As you know, we partnered with your charity, Lend a Hand India, to raise over $30,000 in the fall. Our question for you, first of all, thank you for being here, is what is your measure of success for Lend a Hand India for the next 5 to 10 years, and specifically with the donation that we have just provided with you, how are you going to be able to measure whether that's been put to the best use?
Okay. So I think the success for Lend a Hand India in larger terms, and I'll answer the question about the 30,000 donation, as well, is that, somebody asked me the other day, what is the mission or vision of Lend a Hand India? And I said, another day I read a biography of Dr. Kurian, the founder of Amul, the man behind the Amul. You must read it if you get a chance. I too have we are in Washington, D.C. here, so that's called I too have a dream. And to me, what Dr. Kurian did to change the face of dairy industry in India is what we would like to do in the case of vocational education for India, right? At the larger level, that how do we sort of make the vocational education as being part of the mainstream education. Now, going back to the donation, and first of all, thank you so much for, the kind, generous donation, as well as the outreach and the support which we have got through this, support and sponsorship. So we will be actually setting up our program into 4 more schools to provide vocational education as part of the school curriculum from 9th to 12th grade. So that is something which will be happening through the support which we got. And the measure of success there would be that after 10th grade, how many students are choosing non-conventional careers? So for example, we're talking about that everybody usually goes for an arts, science, or a commerce. Are you going to ITI? ITI is like a trade schools in India. Or are you going to Polytechnic? Or are you taking some vocational course or not? After 10th grade, are we able to provide you for that or not? Second, we will be sort of supporting them through career counseling as well for that process. And as in India, most of the time it's your parents who are deciding what you do in your, in your career rather than you yourself. So counseling of parents as well as much as the students will also be done through that. And thirdly, that is a little long-term scenario. We'll be looking after 5 years that out of that, students whom we trained, how many are on their own or how many of them have, got the employment through that, right? So that's how we'll be measuring the success for that. But thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, both of you, for all of your contributions to actually closing the skill and employment gap in India, and for your insightful comments on this panel. So can we get a round of applause for our panelists? And thank you very much for being a very engaged audience. And sorry we couldn't get to all of your questions, but you can catch them outside in the 5-minute break before the next panel. So thank you, guys.